Hi, how are you? So nice to see you. You doing okay? Alhamdulillah. You should be really proud of your daughter. Yeah, she did so much for us here, alhamdulillah. We're really blessed to have her in our community. Yeah.
Imam Khalid is also from.
Yeah. Are you visiting from Pakistan? Are you from New York?
No, we live.
Your mom lives here too? Yeah? Okay. Well, please come by more often if you
Sure,
can.
sure, sure.
Yeah.
I like here, like, this is the best community. And
Alhamdulillah.
I'm, like, thankful to my God, like, she comes here and
Yeah.
she finds a good
Well, we're
place
thankful she's
to
here too.
spend the time.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. If I can ever do anything for you, please let me know. Inshallah. Yeah,
Thank you so
thank you.
much.
Okay, I'll see you inshallah. Are you ready? Yeah. It's on? Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay, why don't we get started, inshallah? Bismillah, Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So, where we ended last week in our discussion of the Seerah was leading into the genealogy of the Prophet alayhi salam and what led to his birth in this world, but didn't talk too much about the birth. We're going to talk a little bit more today about what was going on and transpiring at that time, the year of his birth, some of the lessons we can extrapolate from it. But we want to contextualize it in certain prisms. So if you remember last week when we were ending the conversation, we were talking a lot about the important role that water plays just in various kind of junctures of the Seerah literature. Do people recall what I'm talking about? We were here last week, right? The well of Zamzam, the well gets uncovered again. They go to seek counsel on whose authority the water is in, and they run out of water. Right? There's so much that's there that essentially gives us an indication as to how this society is structured and where this pivotal resource plays a key role in the development of so much throughout the Seerah literature. We want to have this conversation tonight around a particular value and key ingredient to a society's success that's rooted in the dua of the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam when he's leaving his wife Hajar and his son Ismail there. They make a dua that is incorporated into a series of du'as in the second chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, starting from verse 126. What I'd love for people to do is just pull it up on their phone. So the second chapter, Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 126 to 129. So we can also start contextualizing what is in real-time experience and understanding the Quran not just as a text of law and ritual and theology and ethics and values, which it is, but also understanding it as having historical record to it. Does that make sense? Yeah. Can somebody read that verse, Surah Baqarah, the second chapter, verse 126? Arabic or English, whatever you're able to do. Does anybody have it in front of them? It's the Quran, it's the book of Muslims. Yeah. You know the book that I'm talking about? Yeah, go for it.
وإذا قال إبراهيم ربي اجعل هذا البلد آمنا وارزق أهلها من ثمرات من آمن منهم بالله واليوم الآخر قال ومن كفر فأمته قليلا ثم أضطروا إلى أضطره إلى عذاب النار وبئس المصير. In English, and when said Ibrahim, my Lord, make this a city secure and provide its people with fruits to whoever believed from them in Allah and the day the last, he said, and whoever disbelieved, then I will grant him enjoyment a little, then I will force him to the punishment of the fire, and evil is the destination.
Jazakallah khair. So in this dua, the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam is asking for a very specific thing for the city of Mecca. Right? We're in a place now where we've already talked about where there's seemingly a shift in gender dynamics, race dynamics, that Hajar, peace be upon her, is an elderly black woman with her infant child, Ismail, peace be upon him. The Jurhum tribe come when the well of Zamzam is spurred forward, water is bringing animal life, birds, etc. They settle and they establish the city of Mecca. The dua of the Prophet Ibrahim is key to understand as it relates in particular to so many things. But when we talk about this year that the Prophet is born into, that's called Am al-Fil, the year of the elephant, this dua plays a pivotal role because the Prophet Abraham, you can come in and pray. Can we have people just move in this way? Yeah, you can come and make, yeah. The Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, his dua is asking for Allah to give a very specific thing that make this city a balad that is amina, one that is safe. It has security to it. You want to think about this from the standpoint of the way societies, cities, nations get structured. If you lived in any part of the world and had the largest of mansions possible, you had as many cars, you had affluence, wealth, it was just at your leisure, but there was no safety in the city, then what difference would it make? Does it make sense? If there is no order, there is no sense of just security, then there's going to be no opportunity for growth communally or individually. This dua that the Prophet Ibrahim is making has a particularity to it in that he's qualifying that we want this security as well as this thamarat, this abundance of just food, fruits, everything. We talked about this. You go to Mecca or Medina for Umrah, it's crazy that there's literal fruit from everywhere all year round. But he's giving a specific understanding that I want this to be applied to people who have a belief in God in the last day. And Allah's response to the dua of his Khalil is that, and it's going to also be for those who don't believe in those things. They're going to be given enjoyment from it, even if just a little bit. Does that make sense? Because we have an understanding that our God is a God of everybody, that he's the provider of provision for everyone, those who believe in him, those who do not believe in him. But the key point that I want you to think about here is this dua of the Prophet Ibrahim that he's making centuries before. The Prophet Abraham saying, make this a city that is safe. Let safety be in this city. Can we read the next few verses? Because they're going to become relevant as the story goes on in terms of transition of power and all of the different things that are coming up. So, verse 127, can somebody read that? Yeah.
And remember when Abraham raised the foundation of the house of Ismail, both praying, our Lord, accept this from us. You are indeed the all-hearing, all-knowing.
Right, and a lot of us know this dua, رَبَّنَا تَقَبَّلْ مِنَّا إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. This is happening in real time. They are now after the time the Prophet Ibrahim's son Ismail is an infant. because he has to be grown to build the house in Mecca, right? So this is now a dua at a later time that they're making as they are building this space that is going to ultimately become a space that celebrates universality of individuals in their mode of worship to the divine. Because the Prophet is unique in that our theology and tradition builds itself off of an idea that he was a prophet that was establishing a space of worship of God for people from all walks of life. Not just people who came from a particular locale or culture or a certain social class. This is distinct from other prophets that were sent to particular specific communities and people. Can we continue? 128. You can keep reading if you want.
Our Lord, make us both fully submit to you, and from our descendants a nation that will submit to you. Show us our rituals and turn us in grace. You are truly the acceptor of repentance, most merciful.
So he's talking now about what is going to happen generationally. So we talk about the genealogy, and we talk about how idolatry comes in, and there's different things that are going back and forth, but there's still a sense of foresight. People that are going to come. And then the last verse, 129.
Our Lord, raise from among them a messenger who will recite to them your revelations. Teach them the book and wisdom, and purify them. Indeed, you are alone, are the Almighty, all-wise.
So the prophet is coming from the people that they're making dua for in this safe city. If you've ever heard the story of the people of the elephant, which we're going to talk about today, this is transpiring now in a state of conflict. It's a miraculous story. And historical analysis, we said, is quite often at odds with religious accounts of things. But with Islamic accounts historically, you don't really see that being a challenge. That historical accounts from objective historians, as objective as history can be, right? And you want to understand this. History is not an objective like science. You can read a book that's called The Killing of History. Do you know? That essentially posits itself off of the idea that the variations of history that one gets exposed to is based off of those who are in power wanting to teach you the stories that they teach you. So you learn about when local demographics, indigenous people pick up arrows and shoot them, but you don't learn about what was compelling them to go into a state of war in the first place. It wasn't an offensive, but a defensive reaction. Do you get what I mean? Right? There's a reason why when you go to school in this country from a young age, if by any chance you might choose to take an elective course, if you go to a college in what actual black experience is in this country. But in what is publicly mandated education, from the time you are in pre-K until your senior year of high school, nobody's actually telling you what it's like to be a black person living in this country. There's not actual historically accurate teachings. Think about it. If you went to school in this country, how did they teach you about slavery? How can you fundamentally leave from school 13 years of education, kindergarten to 12th grade, and you don't have a disdain for supremacy? Right? Because the people who are teaching you history are the ones who want it taught in a certain way. That's why you want to also see the Quran as a text that has historical record to it, because it allows for us to understand numerous events, but give us an insight to the way we are connected to certain things. It's also important for you to know the history, because there's a lot of places in the world right now that you can go to where people will take advantage of a lack of literacy in certain things and tell you your history is something that it's not. Right? You can go to Jerusalem right now, and people will take advantage of the fact that as a Muslim, you don't know what your history is. And then validate and justify oppression, occupation, so much more, dismantling of sites that are historic to our tradition, saying that, well, this is what actually happened. Does it make sense? So here, we want to be able to understand this part in what is going to come ahead in terms of this section of the Seerah. How many of you have ever heard the story of the people of the elephant before? You raise your hands. Abraha comes, and Surah Al-Fil in the Quran, Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashab al-fil. We're going to talk about in a lot of detail. This man comes with armies of elephants that the Arabs have never seen an elephant in their life before. And historically, we are taught that this year is important because they didn't have a calendar-based system. So they're talking about this major historic incident as a reference point to things that take place that year and in time that comes after, right? 2 years after the elephants came, 3 years after. The prophet is born in the year of the elephant. And when we talk about this story, you want to understand that where we ended last time, right? His father Abdullah, his mother Amina, right? The prophet having the title of being the son of the two sacrificed ones. If you remember what we talked about last week, what was going on with his father Abdullah and the oath that his father Abdul Muttalib had taken, the grandfather of the prophet, to sacrifice one of his sons if he was given more sons. They're all born into Mecca. So that means when this war is taking place and this army is coming to Mecca, the prophet's mother is pregnant with him in the city that's going to be attacked. Most people would say after the incidents of Abraha coming into Mecca, it was about 2 months later that the prophet is born. So his mother is about 6 or 7 months pregnant when this is taking place. Do you get what I'm saying? We don't quite often teach it in this way. That it's Sunday kind of school trivia knowledge. What year was the prophet born in? The year of the elephant. What was the year of the elephant? The year that this army came with elephants to destroy the Kaaba. This dua of the Prophet Ibrahim, with safety in mind, and the idea that we need someone from amongst these people to come and teach them what it means to actually be a true worshiper of God. Pure tawheed, monotheism, necessitates the protection of the city because the prophet is in his mother's womb during this time. That's happening in real time. Does that make sense? So if we get into an understanding of how we even get to this point, where we talked about very briefly the role that Christianity and Judaism play in this entire area during that time. We talked about how idolatry came. Amr bin Luhay al-Khuzai brings this idol Hubal, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. But we want to think out now, what is the compulsion of this entire army of elephants coming with 60,000 soldiers towards Mecca? Because nobody cares about Mecca really at this time. There's not a lot going on there. When you think about society, right? People come to New York City and they're in shock as to what's going on here. Large buildings, skyscrapers, museums, all of this kind of stuff. This is not happening in the Meccan Peninsula. This was a city established by this tribe of the Jurhum, who they were nomadic enough that they could leave where they were to come and settle in what became the city of Mecca. Where do you read in any books about the magnificent structures built in the city of Mecca? Where do you think when you're thinking about what draws people to New York City in relation to arts and history and context? A lot of that is not what is associated with the city of Mecca. Some would say this is purposeful, that when Islam comes in now, it can help to establish civilization based off of a foundation rooted in Islam as a religion. But there's not really that much going on in Mecca other than they have the Kaaba and they become now the epicenter of what is religious and have a different sense of notoriety as a result of this. Like, there was a lot of Arab tribes at that time that couldn't travel so much without a fear of being attacked. But nobody attacked the Quraysh. They could travel and engage in trade at any time of the year because they were the caretakers of the Kaaba. It gave them a certain recognition, but outside of that, what else was there that was really going on that made this a desirable place for people to want to be? It's not that different, right? Why do we not go into Myanmar to help the Rohingya? The way we can devise facades of plans to go into Iraq, to go into Afghanistan, to go into Libya, to go into other places, because there's a different set of interest when you're talking about oil and resources and wealth and what is economic. What are these people going to get from attacking the city of Mecca? There is nothing there. They didn't even have water for so long. Abdul Muttalib came and uncovered the well of Zamzam. There's not a lot that's happening in this area. So what you have is a man who is the king of Yemen. His name is Taban Asad. And he is traveling to do business in Syria, in Sham. While he's doing this, he has a son who gets killed in the city of Medina. When he hears that his son is killed in the city of Medina, he goes to Medina to destroy the city of Medina. This is before it is Medina, right? Yathrib. It's a place where there's also not so much swampland. When the companions went after Hijrah, the migration from Mecca to Medina, years later, when the Prophet is establishing the city of Madinatul Munawwara, the illuminated city, they are getting sick all the time. They don't like Medina. This is why the Prophet makes a dua for people to have love in their hearts for the city of Medina, because the environment is different, the culture is different. There's again not so much going on there. When Taban Asad comes to the city of Medina at that time to destroy it, there are Jewish people that come from the city of Medina, in particular rabbis, to stop him, saying that this isn't a city you want to mess with. This is a protected city. If you do something to this city, you will have to deal with consequences from God towards you. Taban Asad is in a place where he takes these words to heart. And what these Jewish people are doing is, within their text, they have indication also that there is a foretold prophet that will come at some point. And so they settle as tribes in the city of Medina because their texts are giving indication that this is where this man is going to come. So you have 3 tribes that are Jewish tribes that are already situated in this place. The Banu Qaynuqa, the Banu Nadir, and the Banu Qurayda. They're just waiting for when this last prophet is going to come. And when they tell him that this is what's going to take place, he not only is so impressed by them saying this to them, that his impression is such that he actually becomes Jewish. And when he goes back now to his own community, he is on his way back to Yemen, and he is in a place where he is stopped by another tribe that has issues with the Quraysh, and they say to this man, you need to go attack the Quraysh in the city of Mecca. And so he sets out to do this, and these people again say to him, these Jewish people, that you cannot attack the city of Mecca. If you're going to do anything, you should go and you should follow in the legacy of the Prophet Abraham and make tawaf around the Kaaba. Taban Asad says that you should come too, let's all go. And these people say, we are rabbis, we're scholars, it won't be appropriate for us to walk in these places where these idols are. Principle that's drawn from here is that sometimes these things do make a difference. You don't have to bear the burden of every Muslim in the world on your shoulders, to the point that you lose your identity, you lose your name, you lose any semblance of who it is that you are. But your presence and absence in certain gatherings will have impact and set precedent. And there becomes categorical distinctions sometimes that individuals that hold certain roles and realities, it's a little bit different if they are in certain spaces than people who could be understood in religious connotations to be from the laity. Does that make sense? And so he goes and he makes this tawaf, and he's the first one to actually put some type of cloth on the Kaaba. Nobody's done that before. He does it. And he repeats this and gives a cloth upon it annually, year after year. And he gets to a place where he takes those who convince him about the validity of Judaism back to Yemen and encourages them to also get people to embrace Judaism. In our religious understanding, we take this to indicate that there is an element of actual proselytization in the original teachings of Judaism. A little bit distinct from what it has today, but he's purposely bringing these people back so that he can get people to become Jewish. Where Christianity comes in is you have now Isa alayhi salam, Jesus, peace be upon him, who has many of his followers that also get dispersed through these lands. Individuals start to change theology, etc. But some of these people who maintain a connection to what the teachings were of Jesus, peace be upon him, they end up also in Yemen. And they start preaching in a part of Yemen called Najran. And you get to a place where by this time, this man, Taban Asad, is no longer in rule, and his son, a man by the name of Dhun Nawas, he is in charge. And they start to persecute the Christians in Yemen because they don't want Christianity to take over what is the state religion at that time. Does this make sense so far? There's a hadith that you can find in Sahih Muslim that talks about a story that involves a boy and the king. We won't go into it so much. In Surat al-Buruj, there's a group of people that's called the Ashab al-Ukhdud, the people who essentially were made to walk into a pit of fire. Right? That there is a challenge to the prevailing authority from a religious standpoint, and the boy is taken as an apprentice within the king's palace, eventually converts to Christianity, and there's an instance now where he, at the end of his life, is challenging the authority of the king, right? These are individuals who are very tyrannical in their exertion of authority. And so he lines up everyone and he says that the only way that you can stop me, because he tries again and again to kill this boy and it doesn't work. And he says the only way that you can stop me is to have me stand and to shoot an arrow that you invoke like the Lord of this boy as you shoot the arrow towards me. And then he does this and takes the boy's life. But everyone hears the king take an invocation by the God of the boy, who is not seen as the God of this man, nor adhering to his tyranny. And so all of these people then leave what is that kind of common set of customs towards embracing the religion that this boy was preaching. And the king says, line up the trenches, fill them with flames, and get all these people to go into the fire. And there's a mother who's holding her child, who's thinking now, do I recant my faith or do I go in? And one of the three instances we're taught that a child speaks in their infancy is here now. The baby is telling the mother, you are on the path of truth. Don't stop. And she moves forward with the child in hand. And this is how many of these people pass away. It's a long hadith in detail. You can look it up, the hadith of the boy and the king. You can look at this chapter that speaks about the Ashab al-Ukhdud, but we won't go into it in too much detail. Some of the people survived from that, and they go to the Roman kingdom, which is Christian, and they say, this is what they're doing to Christians. The Romans say, we're too far away, but the Najashi of Abyssinia is a Christian man. We know this also years later, when the Prophet has his companions leave from Mecca to seek sanctuary in a kingdom. He sends them to Abyssinia, modern-day Ethiopia, to live under the Christian king, the Najashi. So the Christian king, the Najashi, he sends now some of his generals and army, including a man by the name of Ariyat, who takes on what is taking place in Yemen and establishes now a control. When Ariyat has taken over, and there's a connection now between Yemen and the Najashi of Abyssinia and the Christianity that's there, he's not seen as like the best person, Ariyat. And so there's a coup that takes place against him by another general whose name is Abraha. And Abraha, he is successful in his coup. He is now essentially the governor of this part of Yemen. And when he's in charge, he sees a lot of his people going north, and he asks, where are you going? And they say, we're going to make pilgrimage to Mecca, where the Kaaba is. There's not really so much else going on. So he's asking, why are you going to this place? Like, what makes sense? So he says, you don't need to be going to Mecca. I'm going to build a cathedral unlike anything the world has seen, that he calls Al-Qulais. And he says, you all should be making pilgrimage here. The world should be coming to where we are. What he's told people in Abyssinia after he's staged this coup is, I did this for you all. That these people who were in charge, they were making things a lot weaker for us as a community. I want us to be strong. I want us to be powerful. And so they kind of let him do what he's doing. And he builds this massive cathedral, Al-Qulais, hoping that people will shift from going to Mecca and coming here. And as he's making his intentions known and people hear of this, there is a tribe of Arabs who hear about this. They go to the cathedral and they essentially relieve themselves in the cathedral, taking their excrements, putting it everywhere, essentially vandalizing this space. Abraha, out of retaliation, he says, I'm going to now go and destroy the Kaaba. He's got the reason that he needs to attack Mecca. We're going to see, and if you go to the chapter in the Quran that is called Al-Fil, the elephant, this is the 105th chapter, right? Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashab al-fil. Have you not seen the way that your Lord dealt with the people, the companions of the elephant? Contextualizing it might seem like it makes sense. This man built this thing, and people came in and disrespected it. He assembles 60,000 soldiers. They say anywhere from 9 to 13 elephants, because they have a relationship to Abyssinia, which is modern-day Ethiopia, where in Africa there are elephants. There's no elephants in Arabia. He comes ready to take on anything, to steamroll them. It's a problematic kind of conversation in the sense that we're not in his shoes. So one might say, well, I don't know what I would do if I was in that place. But if you were to weigh out now what the consequences were in retaliation of the actions, does it seem like the only thing that this guy wanted to do was defend the honor of that space that he built? Or is he in a place where he is a person of authority, power? He's got a 60,000 person army. The Arabs don't have any of this. They don't even have water for a long time. He doesn't need so much to justify that when you are in a position of authority, you don't have to abide by what is essentially the law, for a lack of better words. You can be above it. So I'm going to go and I'm going to essentially destroy this place. And nobody can do anything to me in return. Does it make sense? What I'd like for you to do is take 2 minutes. Just turn to the person next to you. How do we draw an understanding of what this is? Because this first verse in Surah Al-Fil, I want you to read it and relate it to here, that what Allah is essentially saying is, did you see how it is that we dealt with those who sought to oppress other people? Do you see what happened to the ones who were seeking to be tyrannical in their rule, thinking that there is no consequence to their behavior? Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil. Do you see what happened to these people of the elephant? The way your Lord, your Rabb, took care of them. This man is in a place where the authority is something that is skewing the policy that he's putting into practice. How do we take from this an understanding of how things function even today in the world that we're in? People of privilege, people of power, the way systems are structured, how that impacts those who are underserved and underprivileged. If you could turn to the person next to you, just kind of talk it out for a few minutes, and then we'll come back and discuss. Go ahead. Okay, so what are some of the things that are coming up for people? What are you discussing? Who wants to start? Yeah.
You know, just like
There's some.
just like last week, I was telling my friend Shafi here that, like, since moving to New York, I've been really privileged to meet a lot of Orthodox Jews. So when you started talking about the individual something Assad from Yemen, I got really fixated on that. Shana Tova to anyone here who is Jewish or listening to the live stream. Happy New Year. We were having a chat that, does that mean, and I guess this was my question, that, and my brother Peter kind of answered it, does that mean like the original Jews of Medina, they acknowledge like the Kaaba as a religious site? And like, is that how I should interpret it? Like, if I...
Yeah, I mean, they're still rooted in an Abrahamic tradition, right?
Yeah.
And they understand kind of where it is. Our theological understanding is that like texts have been changed,
Yes.
like scriptures have been changed, but there's people who are still adhering to certain things and remnants of it, and it's passing on in different ways. So people are still making Dua of the Kaaba. They're still honoring the rights of the Prophet Abraham, but they're altering, like they're moving things in different directions. Do you know?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I was just really, thank you for sharing that, because that's kind of what I kind of got stuck on that after you started talking about a lot of other things, but that's kind of where our conversation was.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. Other thoughts? Yeah.
I was just thinking what you said. So I just think that he showed like so much arrogance in a way that he forgot to put him in this position, give him all those privileges, and at some point he didn't show like that much gratitude, I guess. And when you have that much power, that means doing something good, maybe for like doing something bad. Just because of your ego, and at some point you think you're above the law, but you're not the law.
Yeah, what Abraha is doing, right, as along the way, he's meeting tons of tribes. A bunch of tribes don't fight with him at all. They just yield because their main idols are at the Kaaba. They don't want those to be destroyed. There's some who have retained like possession of their main idols, and they're negotiating with Abraha. But as he's talking to people, he's telling them, you know what, these guys came and did this to this church, and that's why I'm coming to like destroy Mecca. You know, this group of Arabs that's near Yemen did this, so we're gonna go and destroy these Arabs over there in retaliation. Do you know what I mean? People buy into it. We went to Standing Rock when the oil pipeline issues were happening some years ago. People know what I'm talking about? Standing Rock, right? And we're there in the winter. I took like students from here, and my wife and my kids went. Linda Sarsour came with us. We met Sheikh Dawood Yassin there with a handful of students from Zaytuna because he was working there at that time. We're just living on the lands at Standing Rock. And it was cold. It was freezing. There's no bathrooms. And there's people coming with like these high pressured hoses, like pushing protesters away. And every morning we'd be together. The chieftains of the tribes would gather people and say to them as reminders, like, you all are here and we appreciate you being here, but just remember, after you leave, we'll still be here. So your actions are going to set precedent for what people think of us. The kindest, like gentlest, sweetest people. On our way out, we stopped at a Waffle House on the way out. No, we stopped at a Cracker Barrel, right? People know what Cracker Barrel is, right? You know what Cracker Barrel is? It's like a diner, Friendly's, IHOP, but it's very different as Cracker Barrel. It probably has a lot more butter and everything. And you can eat like a table full of food this much for $5 because we're not in New York City, you know? And we're talking to the waiter. I'm contextualizing this for you so that you can understand the nature of the conversation. The waiter himself is from a minority background. And he says, "What are you all doing here?" And even before we can respond, he said, "Do you see, like, have you seen the mess that, like, these protesters are creating at Standing Rock?" And he's just repeating talking points that are coming from, like, straight media narrative that is influencing perspective, right? You think out how a war on terror builds itself out. The synergy between government and media apparatus, politicians utilizing terms like Islamist, terrorist, jihadist, fundamentalist, TV shows like Homeland and 24 reinforcing stereotypes, and then domestic policy and foreign policy that destabilizes entire nations in the world while simultaneously limiting access to people's family members, mass deportation, Guantanamo Bays, Patriot Acts taking place. It's rooted in a similar process to how the war on drugs gets concocted. An understanding a stratified society from slavery to Jim Crow to mass incarceration. Politicians utilizing terms like predator, thug, as TV shows like Cops Air, where usually white men in blue uniforms arresting black men to reinforce stereotypes. And then you have a war on drugs that can't be called a war on black people, which is just a war on black people. You can literally go online. If you've ever read the book The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, or you have watched the documentary 13th, and there's a man by the name of John Ehrlichman. John Ehrlichman, he says on the record, the Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. Do you understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. This man was an advisor to the President of the United States of America. They sat in a room like this and they concocted a strategy that the fallout to them was only anti-war activists and black people. Abraha goes to people and says to them, with an army of 60,000 people, and massive elephants that people have never seen these creatures before. We're coming to destroy them because this man relieved himself in the church. And all of the people are like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Go ahead, you should do it. It's the same way. We're going to get these weapons of mass destruction. We need to have these rules in order to ensure our safety and security. People buy into it through narrative that gets imposed. The strategies by those in authority are exactly the same, from centuries ago until today. You can juxtapose it. There's literal hadith where a Bedouin also comes and urinates in the masjid of the Prophet of God. The companions go to stop him and to, what are you doing? And the Prophet says to them, let him finish. Just let him be. And then the place that the man urinates, he tells these people who are upset, go bring some sand and just put it on top of the spot. It's a distinction in leadership. One that is a leadership that is about servant-based leaders, that we are here as leaders to serve those that we are in community with, or a model that is the CEO type understanding, the people are here to serve me. It detaches itself from what the actual teachings are of even his own religious tradition. And it politicizes religion in a way that becomes deeply problematic, that now engages in, I just want more power. I just want more authority. I just want more control. And I don't care who I have to literally obliterate. This man is telling you in 1968, which is not so long ago, we were purposely trying to get people to dislike black people. And what the Seerah is telling us is Abraha is getting people to also understand that his point of view has some basis, that really, what sense does it make? We're going to show you our power. We will put more funds into military-industrial complex than we will put into educational systems. In New York City, kids are having their public schools just entirely ransacked of any type of programming to enhance their education, while there are more cops all over the street militarizing in ways that make no sense. It's the same thing. People are going to get you to be pacified by being able to challenge what you find in terms of security from a worldly standpoint. Nobody wants to be the one to stand up to Abraha. Nobody wants to be able to say, even if I have to lose what I have, I don't want to. Systemic oppression exists not just because oppressors are doing great, but because many of us are not willing to let go of the privileges we are afforded from the same structures that oppress other people. Go and destroy them, just don't do anything to our idol. You can go and take them down, we're fine with it. Just leave our stuff alone. Does it sound like how the world works today? And this chapter, the chapter of the elephant, is telling the prophet of God and his people, Allah is on the side of the oppressed. This entire battle takes place. Abraha goes into now the confines of the city. He's getting closer and closer and closer, where he has basic resistance. There's a chieftain of a tribe by the name of Nufel, who tries to stand against him. They get destroyed. Nufel is taken as a prisoner of war. This is going to be important because later on he plays a key role. He's a friend of Abdul Muttalib, the prophet's grandfather. They get to the city of Taif, and at Taif, the people of Taif negotiate with him and actually send one of their people to work with him to get to where he needs to be. And the person that's appointed is seen as a person who just engaged in an act of betrayal. And Abraha finally gets it to Mecca. There's shepherds that are around the city of Mecca. And they have their camels, they have other things, and his people start to raid these caravans, right? 60,000 soldiers is a lot of soldiers. If you've ever been to parts of the world where there is this type of oppression, it's crazy to me. I don't know how many of you are lawyers in this room or studying to be lawyers or want to be a lawyer. Makes no sense to me that in the curriculum where you study for 3 years to be a lawyer, they never take you to a prison to see how prisons function. They simply just don't. It's purposeful. You get in your own head that the defendant has all these negative connotations. A lot of people who are sitting in prison don't deserve to be in prison. And many of them who are in prison, they're like really nice people. But you can control through narratives of fear, perspective, and perception in these ways. it becomes deeply problematic. When he gets to the outskirts, 60,000 soldiers, each one of them buys into the idea. They're not conscientious objectors. They're rolling with this notion that we're coming to trample these people. You think they care whose sheep they're stealing? You think they care whose women they're assaulting? You think they care what they're leaving behind in terms of anything? This is why you shouldn't be surprised when you see images of areas that are not just conflict zones, but occupied territories. Where you look and you try to understand, how is what's happening in India happening in India? How is genocide taking place in different parts of the world? Why are the Uyghurs being oppressed? How is it the Palestinians continue to go through what they go through? Authority in and of itself is something that can be quite intoxicating. To the most minute of levels, what would possess a father to beat their child? How could a husband actually abuse their wife? These things are embedded all within this story. So you can't just see it as being something that is about one line that says the prophet was born in this year. It's about safety in all of its understandings, and that as Muslims, this is basic hadith. Al-Muslimu man salim an-nas min lisanihi wa yadayhi. That the Muslim is the one that humanity is protected from their tongue and their hands. You're not the perpetrator of violence. You are the one that speaks out against violence. And so these people, they take camels, sheep, whatever else. And from amongst them, they also take camels that belong to the grandfather of the Prophet, Abdul Muttalib. Abdul Muttalib, he's friends with this man, Nufail, who was taken as a prisoner of war. And through Nufail, he is able to come to a place where Nufail has befriended the commander of the elephants, a man by the name of Unais. And that relationship allows for Abdul Muttalib to get in front of Abraha. It's all about connections. It definitely is not about how hard you work or anything like that. I went to law school for a little bit. My professor in my first day of class in contract law said to me something that stuck with me for the remainder of the time that I was miserable in law. Our system is not a system of justice, he said. He said, if you have money, you will win. If you do not have money, you will not win. You have to understand also, as predominantly black and brown people, the amount of wealth that you have does not mean you are protected from being an underprivileged minority in this country. Do not think your money is going to be what it is that is going to keep you from being treated inequitably or is enough as a source of power. Connections, unfortunately, play a role in certain things. Abraha, through his connections, Abdul Muttalib, through his connections, gets in front of Abraha. Abraha is so taken aback by this man. Abdul Muttalib, in the narrations that talk about this incident, describe him in detail. He stands out amongst the Arab of Quraysh. He's said to be somebody who's over 6 feet tall, has just a presence about him that when he comes into a room, it just commands attention. Respectfully, though, not disrespectfully. And so Abraha is in charge. He's the one that gets to sit in the throne. And when Abdul Muttalib comes in, he is so taken aback by his presence, he can't be at a distance from him, but he also can't invite him up to where he is seated. It'll set like a strange precedence, so he comes down to talk to Abraha face to face. And he's anticipating, what is this man going to say to me? And Abdul Muttalib, he says, your people, they took my camels. Can you tell them to give them back to me? And Abraha says to Abdul Muttalib, I am coming to destroy your city. And all you're asking me about is the camels that you have? And Abdul Muttalib says to him very famously, I am the Rabb of the camels. I'm their caretaker. I'm the one that looks after them. I am the owner, the master of these camels. That house that you are going to try to destroy, that house has its own Rabb. The way I take care of my camels, that Rabb is going to take care of his house. Abraha is not listening to it for anything. Give the man his camels. And he says to Abdul Muttalib that let your people know that we're coming. Abdul Muttalib goes back to the city, tells everybody to run to the hills. And before he goes himself, he is now holding on to the cloth of the Kaaba. There's cloth on the Kaaba because Taban Asad started the practice of putting cloth on the Kaaba. So he's holding on to the cloth of the Kaaba, and he is making dua to Allah, beseeching him, invoking him, asking of him to make sure this house is protected. The Meccans had a belief in Allah. And if you look in their history of idolatry, there's no idol named Allah. Every other idol had a different name. But they had no idol that they named Allah, because they still recognized Allah as a supreme divine entity. The justification they made for these other intermediary idols was that we need something to be there on our behalf. We're not good enough to directly ask from God. All kinds of other things that got in the way to justify it as a practice. Ours is a pure monotheism in every sense of the word. You don't need somebody to pray for you. You can pray to your God. It is just as much heard as anybody else's prayer. You got to break out of notions of hierarchy to what goodness is, and recognize that there is a value and a deep importance to you raising your own hands to your Creator. Not just for you, but for all of us. This is not a religion that has people. I used to be a chaplain in the NYPD. We can talk about that if you want to. I don't do it. Big mess. One of the things that they used to have us do was give invocations at different things. And there was ceremonies, street namings, plaques, this and that. And I went to one once, and I said, what do we do here at this thing? And they said, you need to bless this sign. And I said, I don't know what that means, right? And I wasn't trying to be facetious, but I said, we don't do this in our religion. You know? I was like, we can pray together. You know, I can lead you in a prayer. But I don't have a capacity to suddenly bless something that was prior to not blessed. It doesn't exist in our religion in that way. Do you get what I mean? And so here, Abraha is turning to Allah in his theological understanding of who Allah is, trusting that Allah is going to provide the safety that is rooted in the Dua of the Prophet Ibrahim that took place centuries before, that this is going to be a safe place. And so Abraha comes, the city is emptied, the elephants are coming, and there's different things that transpire. The main elephant, his name is Mahmud. He's said to be like massively giant. So a person comes and whispers in Mahmud's ear, saying that what they want you to do is go and destroy the house of God. So just sit, just be here. The elephant just sits down and doesn't move. They don't know what's going on. In some narrations, it's not even that he's just sitting the way we're sitting. They say he just lays down on his side. It's a massive thing. They don't know what to do. Everything is a servant of God. Flocks of birds come. This is what Surah Al-Fil teaches us, this 105th chapter, contextualizing it. The birds are defined as birds, but if we look at how it's described in the Arabic, they're referring to like really small, tiny birds, what would be the equivalent of sparrows for us. Each of these birds is carrying 3 stones, 2 in each kind of their talons, 1 in their mouth. In the chapter, it describes this. After the fact, people are asked that, did you see the birds coming? And they keep going from like city to city to country until a last person says that they just like came from the water. This flock of birds, the way that it's described in this chapter, is not that it's a flock the way we sometimes see a flock moving, but its description in the Arabic is denoting it kind of as one unit moving all together. And they come and they start to drop these small stones on everybody. Some of the people perish from the stones. Some of the people are left with physical injury, ailments. Abraha himself is said to survive, and he goes all the way back to Yemen, where he eventually dies as a result from the injuries and ailments from the stones. But the whole idea is that this entire battle took place without any people being on one side of it. And when the chapter is saying, Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil, that do you see how? It doesn't say what. It says, do you see how your Rabb dealt with the people of the elephant? When the Meccans hear this, they remember it. Everybody remembers the year of the elephant. Everybody has understanding of it. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, the wife of the Prophet, she says herself as a child, she remembers 2 individuals who were caretakers of these elephants that have lived in Mecca since the time of this battle. And they are now blind, without any home, and people know their story, like these people were living amongst them. But the chapter is telling you that you, Muhammad, do you see whose side we were on? It's telling the mushrikeen of Mecca, who are racist, classist, engaging in female infanticide, advocating for abuse of individuals. Do you see how we dealt with the people who were trying to be tyrannical? Everybody's in a place where the opportunity to reflect. Don't forget what happened to the people of the elephant. Don't become people who are oppressive, iniquitous, those who get drunk on power, who think they're untouchable. Don't think about things in the way that you believe that you are suddenly something that you are not. And it continues in these ways. This year was the year that the Prophet is born, 2 months later. What our kind of teachers also tell us is that amazing things are happening, miraculous things. It's kind of a segue to the Prophet's birth. 60,000 soldiers, an entire army of elephants, they can't do anything to the city of Mecca. There's a sincere dua that just creates this protection. As you go through the last 10 chapters of the Quran, you have now a connection point from Surah Al-Fil, which talks about this and the birds doing this. The next verse, it says, Surah Al-Quraysh is the next chapter, chapter 106, Li-ilafi Quraysh, right? This is for the ilaf of the Quraysh, right? It's for their protection. Like, why did everything happen in Surah Al-Fil? As it goes into the next chapter, it was for the Quraysh to be taken care of, right? The very last verse of Surah Al-Quraysh, الَّذِي أَطْعَمَهُم مِّن جُوعٍ وَآمَنَهُم مِّن خَوْفٍ, the one who feeds them from hunger and gives them security from fear, right? This is God, right? And what are they saying in the verse before that? فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ, worship the Lord of this house. Who is that Lord? الَّذِي أَطْعَمَهُم مِّن جُوعٍ, the one who feeds you from hunger, وَآمَنَهُم مِّن خَوْفٍ, and gives you security from fear, right? This is who you want to engage in protection. And then in the next verse, in the next chapter, Surah Ma'un, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُ الْيَتِيمَ, right? Do you see these people who essentially their behavior, they don't take care of the orphan, they don't feed the poor, they are negligent in everything that they're doing in their worship. They don't get it. And then you have Surah Kawthar that comes after, where Allah is telling the Prophet, Inna ataynaka al-Kawthar, indeed we gave you an abundance of things of good. But it's the last dua of the Prophet Ibrahim. Let there come from their own people one who is calling them to what your book is teaching. So the transition going from these chapters, that the authority cannot be any longer in these people who have adopted the attitude of the ones who were coming to oppress them in the first place. The people of Mecca, they are taking on the characteristics of Abraha. You don't want to become like that. So the Prophet Muhammad comes, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so that those who are actually sensible caretakers of this place are able to return it to what it's meant to be. A place where people are honored and excellence is seen in the value that they bring, not despite, but in relation to their race, their gender, their class. Compassion, kindness, a sense of accountability. What's its relevance to us, this chapter of Fil and what happens with the elephant? You have choices when you are a minority living in a situation where you are underserved and underprivileged, to either assimilate at a base definition, becoming like those that surround you of the majority, to integrate, offering of what you have, or to remain insular, your own bubble away from everything. A lot of Muslims take on the path of assimilation or insularity. You can walk into some masjids and it's like you walked into a foreign country. I could take you to parts in New Jersey where 4 generations of immigrant family, the 4th generation still speaks English with an accent. It's not to knock people, but they're living in a bubble. Or you have assimilation, especially by many of us who are white passing in our complexions. When you think about immigrant Muslims that came to this country in a time when residency pathways were made easy, in the 70s, we needed to be the best in medicine and science and math and whatever else. So people from all over the world were given a pathway to citizenship. We talked about this 2 weeks ago. People did not come here seeking enlightenment. They came here seeking dunya. It's not to knock anybody, right? But that's what the motivation was. I came to seek wealth, materialistic gain. I didn't come to find myself. I came to find money. And so you had people from all different countries, Indian subcontinent, the Gulf, all over the place, including many Muslims, scientists, engineers, doctors, enhancing our ranks as a country. Many of those immigrants chose purposely to work with white institutions over established black community, many of whom were Muslim living in this country. We have all felt the consequences of that poor decision making. But when assimilation is the overt gain, when you are systematically, psychologically in a place where you buy into the narratives and you feel like you have succeeded because your validation is coming from the system that was built to oppress you in the first place, then that's a problem. And this instance of Amal Fil is getting people to a place that says the Prophet was born in this year where tyranny and oppression was halted by God, and then God sends his messenger to ensure that he is reminding people that this is not what it means to be human. Don't let go of who you are to be accepted by those who only take you in when you become that which you are not. Understand the idea that the gift of your Islam that you have is for you to then integrate, offer of what you have of benefit to people, not overtly assimilate, so that there is no acceptance of you in any part of society because you let go of yourself, or to just live in a bubble. To be Muslim is to not be self-serving. In the history of this community, one of the reasons why we have been able to actually exist in the ways that we are, that at times when we had a lot of challenges in different ways, communities across the board said that we need this Muslim community here. We need this Islamic Center. Abu Bakr radiallahu an, he says to the Prophet at one occasion, I need to leave Mecca, it's too hard. It's before there's Hijrah to Medina, Abyssinia. He's just saying, I gotta go on my own. The Prophet gives his best friend permission to leave. A man by the name of Ibn ad-Daghina, who's not Muslim, sees Abu Bakr and asks him, where are you going? And he says, you all have made it hard for me to worship my God here. I need to go someplace else. Ibn ad-Daghina says to Abu Bakr that if people like you start to leave from our city, our entire society will suffer. If anybody bothers you, let them know you are under my protection now. Abu Bakr used to do things like pray in his courtyard, and he would cry when he would pray, and people would hear him crying or hear his recitation, and they'd become intrigued to see what was going on, and then they would have an entry point to Islam through that. He wasn't standing on a street corner passing out pamphlets. He was letting his actions and his character be what was bringing people to his way of life. The chieftains of Mecca say to Ibn ad-Daghina, you gotta tell this guy to stop. Tell him to pray in his house. The people are becoming kind of entrenched in his recitation. And he went into the house and they still did it. And Ibn ad-Daghina said, they want me to tell you can't do this anymore. And Abu Bakr said, I don't need your protection anymore. There's no benefit from performative allyship. You don't need people to support you only in 60% of your rights. Nor do you get to barter somebody else's rights so that you can have a little bit of this world. That's not what this religion is about. If your comfort is predicated on somebody else living under oppression, then you will stand in front of God for that. That's what this entire incident in the Seerah is teaching us about. Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil. Do you see how your Lord dealt with the people of the elephant? Whose side do you want to be on? Whose validation are you seeking? In the next chapter, فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. Worship the Lord of this house. Stop seeking validation from a society that wants you to stop being who you are. Be proud in your Islam. Be in a place where you allow for yourself to not feel as if you have to leave it at the street corners. And this is what happens to certain people. Do you see what's happening in France these days? All the more reason as to why in this part of the world, where nobody is telling you, other than at the level of psychological impact, that you have to take your mental strength to say, if for no other reason, I got to be that much stronger for my sisters and brothers in other parts of the world who I've gone to Holland. I've stood with people from here in private schools where we've gotten entire tours, and at the end, the principal purposely takes us to the entrance of the school at the end and says, after showing us the entire facility, and here is the box that Muslim girls who are students here put their scarves in before they walk into the school. And the people with me are arguing, fighting. The one brother who's with me, who is African American, coming from this country, not saying anything, understands this is just old school racism. That's what it is. What are you seeking to assimilate into? Why did every tribe say, just go do it, just don't touch our stuff? That's not the mindset of a Muslim. You love for people what you love for yourself. And as a collective, as a community, we're not given $1 million views unobstructed of the park so that we just sit here for our own sake. But we think in the process of integration, how do I offer my skills, my credentials? How do I build to ensure that even if little bit, I leave the world better than what I found it? Because I want to be on the side that makes sense, not on the side that does not make sense. This is a landscape that the Prophet is being introduced into. A moment where tyranny has been defeated and his people have a choice to make, and many of them choose to still go back to engaging in acts of inequity and injustice. And he's coming to now remedy this for his people and humanity on a whole. So we're going to take a pause. I'd like for you to turn to the persons next to you, and for about 4 or 5 minutes, what are you taking from tonight's conversation? What is it bringing up for you? What is it that you're kind of thinking about? We'll come back and discuss, and then we'll stand for Isha. But go ahead. Okay, what are some of the things we're taking away from today? Who would like to start? What's some of the stuff we're taking away from today? What's coming up for people? Yeah.
I already talked once, but share again. Sorry for hogging up the topic.
Totally unacceptable.
It is, we were having a nice, respectable debate on. It's not easy being first generation anything. It's not easy going into an environment where you are the only Muslim. It's not easy growing up in an environment like in a suburban town, New Jersey, where you're the only person who practices Islam, or the only person whose name is in Bob or Alex, right? My name is very odd for them. So we were having a discussion like, I don't know if you brought it up, I don't want to quote you, but someone brought it up about like a flight attendant who's Muslim, and she was pouring alcohol as her job. And the person who asked her, asked her about her job, they were like, how do you feel? Like, you're a Muslim and you pour alcohol for people. And she said, well, I at least do it with my left hand. So from my perspective, being that like, I guess I'm an adult and I live in the, the world, the real world, like I admire that, because a lot of people are put in situations where they commit sin or haram that they don't have a choice. Like people don't, like I gave an example that a lot of women in the city don't wake up and say, I want to be a sex worker, or today I want to be in a strip club. It's the circumstances of society that kind of do that, and I guarantee they go home and do tawbah about it in whatever way they do it. But we were having this discussion that it's tough, like it's really tough to not give up who you are in this world, and I think Allah knows that. Like Allah knows that it's challenging. Some people might lose pieces of themselves throughout life, but at least hopefully at the end, maybe they keep enough of who they are that they can turn to Allah and say, you know what, I really did sin, but inshallah you live up to your name, which is like the most merciful. So we were having that debate, and he's a nice guy here. He's
nice discussion.
Listening to this old guy.
Like I have like a different perspective, because like I was telling Asif that when like the one pouring alcohol or the one like working as a prostitute, for example, stands in front of God, God is gonna ask her like, didn't you have other options? And of course she had other options, because if she has a plan in like 1 or 2 years to find another job, she can find another job. Like if the only way for like anybody who's like to do bad things or like work as a sex worker, then nobody would be working like in a Starbucks, in a restaurant. Nobody would doing the ordinary jobs. They would go for like bad work and like say God would forgive us.
Well, I mean,
This is where we differ.
if I can maybe interject, I've met enough people who actually have to be forced to work in prostitution, who are forced into trafficking. There's not a lot of choice that goes into what a lot of people have to do. And it's important for us to understand this, right? And I'm saying it with love. It might seem as if people have options when in reality they don't. And the issue here is not about me letting go of a part of myself because, your fast makes your hunger voluntary in Ramadan, but somebody's fast who doesn't have food is involuntary. It's just a different experience. You can't relate to it other than through empathy.
We're talking about people who have options, like a flight attendant. If she doesn't like pouring alcohol, if she doesn't like it and she thinks that it's haram, she can find another job. I'm not talking about trafficking.
What I'm saying is she might not be able to. So even when we look at it from the standpoint of what people would say, like in fatwas and fiqh, like, yeah, you shouldn't be in certain roles, but if you have the choice between having no job and no means of providing sustenance for yourself, right? The complexity that will go into this question is going to be like the age, the race, the culture of this person. It's not simple that someone can just walk into a Starbucks and get a job. There's a lot of people who, if that was the case, like, there would be tons of people working in these places. And why I'm saying this is because it's important to not have like absolute perspective that then creates a justification for a reality that we're ourselves not living in. Do you know? There are definitely people who have options. There are people who have options every day to choose to not vote for someone who their tax plan will give them $500,000 a year instead of $400,000. But that same person is going to also limit healthcare options for people who are poor. Like they're going to justify sending immigrant asylum seekers to live in tents on the street, right? Those people have choices. A lot of people do have options and choices. I'm saying here we want to be careful because from the outward it might be that we're perceiving that someone has a choice who fundamentally might not have a choice for a lot of different reasons. Do you know? But the people who sometimes can choose are choosing very poorly in relation to, like, what's the motivation of my choice? Is something materialistic versus just basic survival? Do you know what I mean? And working with a lot of survivors of abuse, working with a lot of asylum seekers, a lot of refugees, working with people who have been dealt with all kinds of stuff, we fundamentally just don't know, like, what someone's going through that compels them in that way. And husn al-dhan is like the root of certain things with like an ingredient of caution, do you know? But it's my clarification is not to disagree with you I get what you're saying, but in an audience of 100 people, it might not necessarily sound the way that we're intending it to sound, that person should somehow just be able to do something with a certain ease. The ease isn't necessarily the guarantee that we might think that it is. Do you know? Yeah. What are other things that we're taking away from this conversation tonight? What comes up for people? Yeah.
So one of the things that like my friend and I we discussed was how in the battle of like the people of the elephants, they were one of the things that you said they were kind of fighting or going into war with no one on the opposite side. And I thought that was, I mean, I guess I never thought about it that way. There was nobody there, and you know, just to have faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and like him like protecting his home. I think that was like very interesting because I was just like, yeah, wait, there was no one on that other side. Like, who were they fighting with? And I don't know, like out of nowhere, there's like flocks of birds coming from the sea, and no one saw them. So, like, I don't know what I would ever do if someone was just like, I'm coming to your house and I'm going to burn it down. Okay, like go ahead. But I think that was like very interesting that you made the point of, you know, they were not fighting with anyone on the other side, and who's your faith? Like, who do you, like, I guess, like, who does your faith lie to at that point?
Yeah, right? فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. Make the conscious decision. Worship the God of this house. Don't worship beauty, because as you get older, you're going to die 1,000 times over. Don't worship wealth, because it's never going to be enough. You're going to keep chasing after it. Don't worship people's validation. Don't worship, like, these things that we seek quite often or in subservience of. The reason why we have a Qibla, like, it's a religion that's meant to give us direction. You know, you do tawaf around the Kaaba, right? All this is rooted in the Kaaba, right? You're essentially doing tawaf around something during the course of the day, the week. What has you running in circles? For a lot of people, it's money. For a lot of people, it's wealth. And they justify other people's inequitous treatment. But the other thing that you're saying that's really important, what were these people coming to destroy? Like, what would they have done to this city? I remember standing with a cameraman on a hill in Bangladesh in a refugee camp for Rohingya, where I hadn't met one refugee who couldn't tell me they hadn't seen loved ones burned alive in front of their eyes. Homes firebombed, cattle set on fire. And as we're standing at the top of a hill, me and this one guy with a camera, we suddenly get engulfed by hundreds of people. I have no idea what's going on. And I'm like, what are they going to do to us? They're not even paying attention to us. All of them are just looking over the horizon. We're very close to the border between Myanmar and Bangladesh. And you can see in broad daylight large clouds of smoke coming over the horizon. And all of these people in their eyes, you can see the trauma because they know that their country people are still being burned alive just miles away. And that could have been any one of them. This is the nature of humanity. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. We created man in the most beautiful of forms. ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ. We let them fall to the lowest of the low. The paradox of the human in its nature is that within each of us is the capacity to be an agent of beauty and an agent of ugliness. And every day you have to actively choose to live with goodness, to choose beauty over what is short-term and temporary that yields you only what is worldly, right? وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. You have to believe it in the way that it's meant, that the world that comes next, what is coming after, is better than what is right now. So don't make bad choices to somehow justify mistreatment in ways that don't make any sense. So the question is posed to everybody. أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ فَعَلَ رَبُّكَ بِأَصْحَابِ الْفِيلِ. Do you see how your Lord dealt with the people of the elephant? And so for the persons who are on the side of oppression, they're the oppressors. Do you wake up? What's going on? And for the one who is battling the oppressor, Allah's on your side. Like He's with you. And then you put it in a theology that's not limited to worldly existence, but otherworldly existence. There's a day of judgment that everything is going to be made balanced. Everything is going to be made restitute. It's all going to be restored. Does it make sense? Okay. Next week, we're going to talk about the actual childhood of the Prophet. It's going to talk about his relationship to the women who nursed him as a child, how he lived with a poor woman, Halima Sa'diyah, in the tribe of the Banu Sa'ad, and why people were rejecting him from the standpoint of like finances and economics. This is really why they pass up on having him as a child in his house. What was it like for him to have his father pass away before he was born, his mother pass away at a young age? What were the kind of things, right? There's like in the Seerah literature, the Prophet is a young boy and he's asking his mother, where is my dad? It's like a very real human experience, right? She takes the Prophet to Medina to see where his father is buried. This is where like the Prophet learns how to swim, right? Because Medina's got like all this like water and swamps and stuff, do you know? But there's a lot going on in his childhood that socializes him to be the person that he is as he grows up. The people that surround him, how he formulates his sense of ethics and values and has these real deep human experiences that are going to build for him his own core belief structure and how he sees himself, how he sees people, and how he sees the world. The idea with this is to understand the Seerah so we understand who the Prophet Muhammad is, peace be upon him. So you're not just arbitrary praying your sunnahs without knowing whose sunnah it is that you're actually following. And to understand that his sending is not in a vacuum, but we've created over 3 weeks a landscape that he's introduced into. He is going to turn this society upside down. This world filled with tyranny and oppression, people burying girls alive because they want sons, slaves being persecuted, mistreated, boulders put on their chests, dragged through the streets, tied up. He's about to change everything. In a movement that he doubts himself, such humility when he gets his first revelation. He thinks he lost his mind. He doesn't sit there with hubris the way Abraha goes in. When the Prophet goes to Mecca to take back Mecca, he's at the back of the pack, head covered, looking at the ground. And anybody he can have retaliation against, he says, the family of Abu Sufyan is forgiven today. The family of so-and-so is forgiven today. You want to think about it from the standpoint of what it means to have good character that is emphasized in this religion. So what the Seerah gives us an opportunity to understand. So this religion is a lot more than just mechanics and black and white and do's and don't and haram and halal and everything's haram. Do you see what I mean? It's about transforming your sense of ethical conduct elevating to a higher level of consciousness. إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِيُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. The Prophet says in the Hadith, I was sent to perfect like ethical conduct. Just treat you how to treat people, treat God's creation, treat the world, treat yourself with love and dignity and respect. And so next week we're going to talk about what his childhood was like. I'm going to ask you to think about it. If you're reading along in the Martin Ling's book, the Seerah book, it's great. Like to understand also what that means from the standpoint of your own socialization. Like why might you see things in the ways that you're seeing them? How do you draw from it principally opportunity to reflect on where your current kind of core belief structure and perspectives are? But that's where we're going to move next week. A couple of quick announcements before we pause for Isha. On Friday, we're going to have a panel in this room or a presentation just dealing with mental health, mental wellness in Islam with an organization called the Nasiha Counseling Center. They're based in Toronto, but they started with like a hotline for people to call. And they found that tons of people were calling them, but the majority were actually from the United States. Like Muslims looking for people to talk to, counselors, therapists, etc. I've spoken at a bunch of their events in Toronto, their galas. They do really good work. You should come to this event on Friday. It's going to be talking about mental wellness, mental health, self-care strategies, how to deal with stress in particular, which I'm sure many of us can relate to. It'll be at 6 o'clock in this room. Maghrib's going to come in the middle. It's likely going to go till like 7:30, 8, maybe even later. But come and be a part of that discussion. We have all of our other halakas taking place. On October 22nd, we're hosting a larger conference. There's going to be 11 speakers coming. Dr. Marwa, who's our staff psychologist, will speak. I'll be speaking. But we'll also have from the Miftah Institute, the Wahid brothers, who are amazing scholars. Mikhail Smith, who some of you might have read his books on emotional intelligence and Islam. He's going to be coming to speak. Majid Mahmoud, who is pretty well known. Ubaidullah Evans, who's an amazing scholar from Chicago, works with the Alam Institute and Talif. There's going to be a lot of really nice people who are coming here that you want to start to build connections with. Why I'm saying this to you, we sent out some emails. People are buying tickets. They're going fast. I would love for all of you to be there, but it's limited in capacity. We're going to do it in the 10th floor of the building next door, which is a larger space. Accommodate people on seats, on the ground, the way we do like our qiyams and chairs around the perimeter, just so we can fit as many people. But it's going to sell out. So make sure you get your ticket. There's discount codes. If you can't afford the ticket, it's $20. And then with a discount code, I think it's like $10. And you also just can show up for free, right? We don't turn people away for anything. But if that's the case, let me know. But make sure you're signing up for it. You're getting your seats and encouraging people to get stuff. We've already sold like hundreds of tickets and it's a month away still, you know? So don't miss out on that opportunity. It's October 22nd, which is a Sunday. It'll go from 2 p.m. till 9 p.m. You can go to the Miftah website, miftah.org, and all the details are up there. And we'll continue to advertise it as well, inshallah. Okay, so somebody can call the adhan. People want to make wudu. We'll call the iqama probably in like 5 minutes or so after the adhan. We'll see everybody next Wednesday, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.